Beneath the mounting global emergency, the solutions we know work aren't the ones handed down from on high. That's been tried over and over, only to fail every time. So my colleagues on this panel did something different. We challenged ourselves to create an opening for people around the world to build their powers to confront broken and ailing systems by launching real-world experiments to replace them and learning through the process. The real story isn't the opportunity we created, but what young people have done with this. It's a gripping story, and we'll start with a video about what young people are doing with this opportunity in one region. After the video, we'll hold an interactive discussion with those who have been leading this work in Bangladesh, Colombia, and Kyrgyzstan, along with our colleagues around the world. I'll now share a brief video with you. And I'm happy to say, as I open up the video, that one of the people who led the work reflected in it is with us here today. So I am just going to cue this up a second time now. Thanks for your great patience. And we are ready to watch.
In the real world. How can young people who see the opportunity to change systems around them for the better develop an idea and test its validity in the real world?
Somewhere back in my head, it was always there that I would do something on my own to contribute to the society, to the nation, if possible.
In Bangladesh, there are a group of classes that are focused on this kind of empowerment, using the classroom as a place to launch real-world solutions.
If I want to be a driver of change for my country, I can't be that driver of change only in the classroom.
In 2021 and 2022, students and faculty at BRAC University in Bangladesh took part in a global experience in social entrepreneurship and leading change in organizations. Participants earn a certificate that equips leaders all around the world to launch real-world solutions to pressing problems. BART professors Alejandro Crawford and Eliza Edge were part of a group of professionals and educators who launched a new course focused on social entrepreneurship.
It challenges students to develop solutions for which there's no blueprint. It makes them paint freehand rather than by numbers. But it provides a structure for doing so and injects the knowledge that one needs every step along the way.
This isn't just a classroom where students are forming a team and going out into their individual communities. The experience is absolutely finding similarities that you have with your teammates, but then identifying what it is within you that drives you and makes your contribution to the team so important.
Dhaka is the capital of Bangladesh, a city of 23 million people. Here, the cohort of both classes, led by Dr. Sebastian Groh, is a professor at BRAC University.
Being an entrepreneur myself, as well as an academic, this combination is really powerful, I think, and I feel like I can contribute the most or support the students the most in that because I can kind of combine the two fields, the two experiences.
The class uses the Rebel-based platform to help students develop and test their ideas and get input from a global group of students and experts.
So we're using an online platform called Rebel-Base. And in Rebel-Base, we have different modules, what we call. The modules are from identifying a problem, designing an idea, designing a prototype, building a financial model, a marketing plan, a total addressable market, up to the final pitch. So basically, we take the students on a ride, literally. Throughout the semester, every week they tackle a different module, and every week they have to be ready in a global class to present this model.
Two students, Shanila Mejabin and Shazami Khalil, participated in the Leading Change in Organizations course and wanted to develop a solution for making pension plans accessible where they work. Shanila is a financial consultant at one of the largest commercial banks in Bangladesh. She saw an opportunity to create a project safety net for the elderly people.
নিরাপত্তাটা শব্দটার মধ্যে কিন্তু আস্থা, বিশ্বাস, নির্ভরশীলতা আছে। সো এই আঙ্গিকে আমরা রিটায়ারমেন্ট পেনশনে না যে রিটায়ারমেন্ট প্ল্যানের কথা চিন্তা করেছি যখন আমরা শুনতে পেরেছি যে ওসান থেকে আমাদের একটি প্রজেক্ট করতে হবে। সো এই কারণে সেফটি নেট বা নিরাপত্তা জালের নামটাই আমাদের কাছে এসেছে এবং আমরা চেয়েছি ফিনান্সিয়াল ইন্ডাস্ট্রিতে কোনো প্রোডাক্ট নিয়ে কাজ করতে।
In Bangladesh, life expectancy is 73 years. The retirement age is 59. Very few people have access to a pension. They have to rely on their families for support.
সোসাইটির একটা বিরাট পার্টি হচ্ছে A60+ যে আমরা গ্রুপটা বলছি যারা বার্ধক্য এজে চলে গেছে। ওই এজে যাওয়ার পরে মানুষ প্রথমে চায় হলো ফিনান্সিয়াল ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্স। এই ফিনান্সিয়াল ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্সটাই তারা নিয়ে আসলে তাদের মধ্যে নিজেদের একটা কনফিডেন্স আসবে।
What I'd like to emphasize, and we'll give you the opportunity to hear the rest of Shanila's story in a few minutes if you're interested, is the way she and young people like her start with a problem. And unlike most of us who have to wish we could get the powers that be to make a change, she developed the change. She launched it. This was part of an experience that we developed. And what I'm particularly pleased about today is that my colleagues that are with me on the panel are the people that conducted this, including Sebastian Gros, whom you just saw in the video. So we will give you the opportunity to see more of that in a few minutes. What I'd like to do now is introduce my wonderful colleagues, Sebastian Gros, whom I mentioned, who is Managing Director of SoulShare and an Associate Professor at Brock University, Hector Hernandez, Leadership Professor at Universidad de los Andes, Bermet Sutbekova, who runs the Social Entrepreneurship and Design Thinking concentration at AUCA, American University of Central Asia. And I'm Alejandro Crawford, CEO of Rebel Base and Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Bard MBA in Sustainability. So I wanted to start by asking each of you to just open. I'm going to have a more in-depth question for each of you in a moment, but just to open with one thing. And we're going to start with dreams, and then we're going to go to reality. And I have always been captivated by the story of the young Nikola Tesla when he was in Italy and saw pictures, drawings of Niagara Falls, and imagined harnessing that power to light up cities, harnessing that power to light up cities. And what I'd like to ask each of you as we open up is to introduce yourself by saying, what's the power that you wish to release and what would you like to do with it? Then we'll talk a little bit about how our program is structured and the certificate that it is a part of for leading change within organizations, like in Shanila's example, as social entrepreneurs starting businesses and programs and initiatives, and as leaders around the world making change. So we're going to get there in just a moment, but let's first go around, starting with you, Sebastian. What's your Niagara?
Thanks, Alejandro. So I think the Niagara Falls are obviously a very impressive big thing, but often big things start from very small things. So my dream or ambition would probably rather be starting from a small thing, like in the Schumacher sense, small is beautiful, because if you have a lot and lots and lots of small things, then something quite big can develop. And we see this in nature in the creation of swarms, like very powerful swarms or schools of fishes, which what that can mean. And to spin this allegory a little bit further, we want to see a swarm or a school, or if you're a little bit more into the Marshall vocabulary, an army of social entrepreneurs. And not
I
only
think the
from
bugs in the swarm might see themselves as an army, Sebastian. I'm not sure.
Probably. And just to stress, it's not only from the places where, where startup and entrepreneurship is known for, to the few, like the Tel Avivs, the Silicon Valleys, the Berlins, and the New Yorks of this world, or the Shenzhens, but from across the world. And I think that makes the experience in our course so interesting, because we have such a diverse set of universities, and we kind of try to give them the tools to be able to become entrepreneurs anywhere they are. And I just want to stress this: innovation can come from anywhere. And the biggest shortcoming, the biggest threat we might face is that we overlook some of those, which could be the big change. And the problems we face are so huge, it cannot be down to a few people to solve them. This concentration of power and of solving capability, I think, is a very dangerous thing, because it's the opposite of diversification in a sense.
It's very interesting, Sebastian, as I hear you speak, and we're going to pick up on this in a moment, but I just want to whet everyone's appetite here. So often we make the assumption that concentration is a safer route. We make the assumption that if Elon Musk thinks that he's done a great job with Tesla, well, then he probably knows what to do with Twitter, because he's a genius, he's brilliant, he's an entrepreneur. It sounds like you're saying that assumption in and of itself is dangerous. And I want to pick up on that risk in just a moment after we hear from Hector Hernandez and Bermet Supekova. But I want to phrase two more questions, Sebastian, just to stir the pot here. One is, built into what you just said is this risk of missing the solution that someone could have created had she had half a chance, that the Shanilas of the world have those solutions in them. And I want to ask you what we need to do to open that up, both in terms of opportunities, the chance to take a risk, the resources required, the knowledge required. So I want to ask you in a few minutes what to do. I also want to ask you on a personal note, as someone who is himself a social entrepreneur, who founded SoulShare, how is it that you combine your emphasis on your own efforts as a founder and on enabling that swarm, as you put it, to be possible? So back to you in just a moment, Sebastian, but thanks for already raising some really controversial and exciting points we're going to dig into. I wanted to go to you next, Hector, and ask you, is there a Niagara for you, whether it's the falls, the source of power, or the lit up cities that you dream of?
Thank you, Alejandro. Well, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to share some of my ideas. So Hector Hernandez from Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, Colombia. And yes, I do have a Niagara Falls that actually seems pretty similar to what Sebastian was sharing with us. When I go out to the front of where I live here in Bogotá, and there's a park right there, and I see just people there with dealing with the issues that most people deal with, like safety issues, or just getting together to create a better environment for their kids or their pets or what have you. So the Niagara for me is how to bring them together in a conversation with the different perspectives, with the different interests and fears, and have them come out with ideas that we can all implement. With basic ideas, it need not to be expensive or complicated, but how to create better solutions in our communities, just based on what people know, as you and Sebastian were saying. So it's a very similar Niagara, but yeah, I see them all the time in my classes or in the communities or in my family or wherever I meet. And I go out and see people struggling and all at the same time wanting to solve problems. Yeah,
Now, Hector, although you charitably are saying it's similar, I think you're actually changing the metaphor. When I think of a swarm of bees, I imagine they're all together, right? They're all in lockstep. They're mindlessly together, and maybe that's
Yes.
just because I misunderstand bees and how they work. But it sounds like you're saying that we almost need to imagine they're all having arguments the whole time. And they're all bridging their differences, so that bringing our metaphor to a human context, if I'm listening well, you've talked about the conversations, the perspectives, even the fears that we have as being fuel for what we could create, much like Niagara was for Tesla.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. I mean, bringing people together, wherever they are, whatever they have in their minds or in their souls or in their emotions, just bring them together to talk and create things that would serve all of us. That's where I am at. Yeah.
So in a few minutes, just as we did with Sebastian, I'm going to dig more into what it means to bring people together who aren't necessarily just the usual suspects, what the challenges are of doing that in practice, and why sometimes we may be tempted to keep listening to the same old folks. So we're going to go there in just a few minutes, Hector, as we get the discussion going. But next, I'd like to go to you, Burmet. And do you have a version of the source of power and what you want to do with it as you do this work?
Hello, guys. Thank you for having me today here. So, although I have never seen Niagara Falls in real life, I can say that mountains are actually powers. And when I say actually the mountains, I feel like there is actually huge need to save our climate, our actual environments, whatever we have here in Kyrgyzstan, because 90% of this land is actually covered in the mountains. And why I'm also comparing to the mountains is because mountains are so huge, and I believe us being a professor, we have actually huge impact or huge influence into our students' life that we can help them or guide them into correct direction. So also this actually gives me more power to work and move forward. Also seeing that we have so many underserved, marginalized group of people that needs actually help, and we really need to actually look into their problems, and we really need to provide to them like solutions that could be implemented. So yeah.
Burmet, I'm really glad you bring up two things that I'd love to pick up on in a few minutes. And one is this metaphor of the mountain, where we, and maybe we'll broaden it beyond educators, those of us in generations that have left the world in its present state of emergency, that nevertheless, we may have some influence to offer, like those mountains that all the water comes down to form lakes and waterfalls. And I want to pick up on how you think we can use that influence better, what we can do better in equipping people who now are faced with such an urgent need to change their world. And I want to, as we do that, really dig into your idea of understanding the situation of those who are marginalized, so that for so long, we have often sort of wanted to impose solutions on them. Oh, we're wise. We know exactly how to solve your problems. And it relates to what I heard Sebastian lead with, in not just looking to those from the global metropolitan centers, but looking to those who might understand problems better as we go. And so let me actually take that opportunity. We're going to go back and talk a little more about the structure of our program in a few minutes, but I'm actually going to hold that because I want to pick up on these themes y'all have raised right away. And Sebastian, I've often heard you say that this idea, what if we miss it? What if we miss the opportunity to create what's needed? And I know that you both, as an entrepreneur, have spoken about 2 million Teslas, except they're electric rickshaws, and how sometimes our mentality isn't doing disruptive innovation by definition, though we think we are, because disruptive innovation means to make solutions available on a far broader basis. I'm wondering if you could talk about that, but also about your own relationship to that swarm, or maybe it's the arguing group of, flock of geese that Hector has given us. How do you balance both creating ventures and all your work into that, and what you seem to be emphasizing, which is the need to make sure that there are 1,000 solutions like your own that are enabled to come to life? Can you speak to that?
Sure, let me try to do two things. First, give a little bit more footing to these concepts of disruptive innovation, as well as what swarm intelligence or swarm power, as we call it here. And then secondly, give a little bit more of practical examples so we get a little bit away from that theoretical level. So first, on the disruptive innovation, that is the Clayton Christensen sense, where you say, okay, that the true innovation is when you make it available to the masses. Now, if we look at electric vehicles, I'm sure that the most of us here in the room right now think about cars. But that's not what's driving the revolution in electric mobility. It's not, by far not. If you look at the numbers, how many electric cars are on the road versus how many electric two-wheelers and three-wheelers, especially in the global south, three-wheelers on the road, we have a factor of 20x more penetration of electric two and three-wheelers. Cars are a joke compared to it. Yet the media and everyone only reports on the Teslas of this world. But that's not what's driving that revolution. Bangladesh alone as a country has more electric vehicles than Tesla has sold in the whole world. So that's what I mean. What if we miss it? What is really driving this revolution? And if we all talk about data the whole time, and those innovations are best where the most data is from, okay, where does the data come from? From the 3 Teslas which run around in Dhaka, or in Bangladesh for that matter, or from 2.5 million electric three-wheelers, which I can remotely control, track, and see how they're moving, where they are charging, where's the battery, what is the status of the battery? Can I actually create an electricity grid out of these vehicles? These are very advanced ideas, which are often discussed in those epicenters of entrepreneurship, but they don't even have the numbers there. We have them here. So if we think about it, should I only focus my money, resources, brain power on these Silicon Valleys? Or would it make sense maybe to also look at the Bangalores, the Dhakas, the Jakartas of this world, where the numbers are much larger, where I can gather more intelligence and data, and possibly can drive this revolution even faster and have a much deeper impact. So I think that is this, what if we miss it? That is that point.
So let's then ask, if we're in danger of missing it, and even to add emphasis to what you've said, if we have very few years to keep missing it, meaning the more we miss it, the more grievous our collective situation becomes, then what can we do? And I know this is a very hard question I'm asking, to bring the opportunity, the money, the resources, the brain power, and even the narrative. You know how you said the story focuses on just the cars. What can we do to flip it in the way you've talked about and actually go to the source of solutions that you're describing and stop listening to the same old folks? Do you have ideas, or are there aspects of the work we have done with our colleagues around the world that you can describe?
I think first of all, it's this, and this is often said, it's the awareness, right? But let me be very specific here. The first class we had, Alejandro, on the social entrepreneurship practicum, and in the subsequent semesters, it was very similar. The reaction I got initially from my students here at Brack University in Dhaka was like, I didn't know there were homeless people in New York, because they started creating and conversing with your students from Bard College, with the students from AUCA, BEMET, and so forth, and they realized oh, the problems are actually not that unique. There are probably if you go really deep, there is certain unique elements and you cannot do these one size fits it all solutions, but that comes later. First of all, we realize we are in this together, and the problems we are facing, we're not alone with those. And whether I'm in Dhaka, Bangladesh, or in the Hudson Valley, there are problems, there are similar themes, and we can work together on those. We then have to, when we stop scratching on ourselves, we have to go deeper and innovate and design for our local circumstances. That's clear. But there is a long path where we can probably make faster progress if we work together.
So I'm really intrigued that you used the words creating and conversing, which are the same words that you had emphasized, Hector, a few minutes ago. And these connections that are being made, and then this contrast you've drawn between realizing that we have problems in common and that we're sort of in it together, but then learning from each locale about making sure it's not one size fits all, to use your phrase. I wanted to turn to you, Hector, and you are, and we should take a moment in after you do this to just clue everyone in on the shared experience we're referring to. But you are the newest geography to have joined us, and I wondered if you could speak to the heart of what Sebastian's saying. How has it been as you went on a limb, brought Colombia into the group? What has been your experience? Are you finding, and could you give us even specific instances or examples of what Sebastian's describing or contrast with it?
Sure, Alejandro, thank you. Well, first of all, I am so glad I was able to put it together and be in this group and bring my students, my cohort, to this amazing experience. But I want to expand on what Sebastian was saying about awareness. I think that there's a couple of extensions of awareness that I think I personally am getting from this class and my students are getting from this class. That in a way it was a bit unexpected. One of them is awareness of my own powers, right? Awareness of my own agency, awareness of my own responsibility when I'm faced with the challenges that I have next door or in my own community. So that's the first thing that that I have discussed with my students, that we really start believing that we have that power to resolve issues. The second thing is awareness of the problems, and awareness of the problems in a very different way that most of us have seen them so far. Like for many of us, the problems that are out there are maybe the government responsibility, maybe the local government, maybe other people's responsibility, you know, like somebody is creating. So we see them as if somebody, we're expecting that somebody was going to resolve it somehow miraculously whenever we were able to elect the right government or the right, you know, whoever is going to solve it. But we're also seeing that each of us has something to say and something to do about those problems. And when also speaking of conversing, when we get together, and we certainly find things that we have in common, interests that we have in common. And besides, one of the most surprising things, and I echo what Sebastian was saying about maybe finding out that in places like New York have similar problems that we have, but also finding out that there's places that have different problems that give us light into our own problems, right? For instance, I had an experience when I heard that there was a group of students in Jerusalem working in lowering the rate of child marriage. And I thought to myself, and I discussed this with my students, that, well, we might not have this as evidently as it is there. But when they mention it, I started thinking, well, maybe we have very similar problems that maybe in a different light are as difficult and as challenging as that child marriage. Maybe violence, certain types of violence or certain type of elements of our culture that really speak to similar issues that of gender and exclusion. So I'm personally finding a wealth, a richness of opportunities to learn about our own problems when we hear other people talking about theirs. And that can happen across the world, or that can happen also in our park. When we just come together and say, well, I see this problem, another person might see it in a very different light just because of their own culture, history, and experience, and so on. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience in that sense.
It's fascinating what you're doing as you talk about awareness. And at the end there, I was particularly captivated that you said it can be the macro with all this global comparison, but it can also be that makes you notice things that are micro and that are right there across the park. I also love the way you spoke of the power, the problems, and the perspective that awareness gives you, because so often we think of just one of those when we think, oh, awareness of our opportunities to make change and all the power that gives us. Well, that's one thing, but then awareness of the problems themselves, without which, and that's why I stopped the video where I stopped it earlier, was she was getting into the detail of the problem. And I wanted to give us a little bit of that, because if we just think about our power and become conscious of that, and we don't get into that conscious of the problem, then what? And then that perspective that you so beautifully ended with, it's really giving me pause. And, I look to your work, Burmette, and your emphasis on design thinking that you bring to this. And one of the things that you've said during this experience that struck me most was to be conscious of that person that might be in a service role. And it might be so easy to think of them as just a supporting character, if they're a character at all. And to turn that if we are not just global, but also, as Hector was saying, are able to notice that person and what they're experiencing, then we can create solutions we would otherwise have missed. Are there examples, and the more real life stories, the way you guys just did, the better, that you might give? And then we'll do a little break. Message from our sponsors. This is sponsored by McDonald's. No, I'm just kidding. Message from our sponsors, where I will lay out just a few slides to show you what we're doing and give everyone who's listening a sense of how this all comes together. But first, Burmette, talk to us about that perspective.
Oh, Alejandro, this is actually a great question. And when I talked about earlier about better serve our community, and this is where actually the social entrepreneurship addresses actually those issues, challenges, opportunities of marginalized population that are at the bottom of pyramids. So this is actually, I want a little bit echo in what Sebastian told about Clay Christensen's, right? Disruptive innovation. This is where you serve actually from bottom to top. And I believe if we start actually looking at the people and the population that are at the bottom of the pyramids, or that is actually not served, underserved communities, then we can actually build a successful enterprises that serves the marginalized group of people. And
can we do that systematically, Burmette? Can we do that systematically as opposed to just intending to? Go on, please. I didn't mean to break your flow.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to systematically I believe we also need to change. We don't have to improve. We need to change the system. So if we change the system, this is what I believe, that changing the system can really reveal that we may be moving to a different direction for a long time. And now we need to change our direction, not improve our direction, not walking faster, not actually wearing better shoes or laying out better highway or freeway, but actually we need to change the direction. And you also mentioned about design thinking. I believe design thinking also helped my students to really see into the problem by empathizing. Empathize is actually taking the time to understand people, the way they do the things and why, their physical and emotional needs, how they think about the world, what's meaningful to them. So we can make our assumptions by being in our spot, right? For example, in the social life. So, and if we want to look into the people, marginalized people, we have never been into that. Maybe some people actually, some people make it out from that actually marginalized group of people. But if we are talking about students that are raised in in a privileged family, then we need to really help them to understand and observe their needs. So this is actually when empathizing helps me by actually addressing questions like, who are they? So what matters to those people? How does actually that solution, how does the solution fit in their life? What motivates and discourages those people? And where do they experience frustration? So by actually addressing all these questions, students or us even, we can learn, understand, see, feel, and do what actually those underserved or people, those people in that problem sees and feels.
I want to pick up. Go ahead, excuse me.
Oh, no, this is what I wanted to say, that this is the real aim or target was Clay Christensen's actually coming up with a disruptive innovation, making actually that it's not a value equals benefit / cost. No, it's a value equals to benefit plus belief plus value again. So where we are creating is a society that cost is actually, the products and services are available to everybody, or maybe alternatives are available for everybody, but at the lower cost, not actually like you are creating Tesla only for people who has money, right? But what about those people that they need also? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I love the way that brings it full circle. I actually am from New York, and our idea of talking to people is to talk along with you as you've experienced. I love this idea that you focus on that brings it full circle to where Sebastian started us. And I actually think it's important that you said, look, we're not just tinkering around the edges, right? We actually need to radically change direction. And ironically, though, to do that is not some top-down shift. It's to use empathy to do those lots of little things that Sebastian talked about, and to really understand the people we're serving, who they are, what matters to them, what frustrates them, what disappoints them, what motivates them, as you've just said. So in a moment, I'd like to pick up and deepen our discussion around what we can do to change the direction by making that work available. We know that there are people all over the world who could be part of that swarm and are not. And so I want to pick up there in just a few minutes, just to make sure everyone doesn't feel as if we're describing this cool thing we've done together and you don't know what it is. I'm going to take just a second, and I want to start, speaking of changing direction, with the urgency of our moment. This is actually a chart that you shared with me, Sebastian, just a few days ago in one of these strange hour exchanges that we all have. It's nighttime for two of us and morning for two others, and there's a lot more in our group. But let's focus on where those lines are coming together. If you see, and this is an emphasis specifically on carbon, if you see how much less time we have now, how much more dramatically and urgently we need to make change. And we're focused here on carbon and emissions and all of the things that contribute to global warming. But we also, in our group, look at things like democracy and education that really are tied together with the fate of our planet and people. And what we're doing about this, now I've got a little picture. Yes, jump in.
Can I just say one sentence to that graph? It's this typical example where, when do we start to listen? And is it in 2000? And then the black line, would have brought us onto a much more doable and, most importantly, much cheaper trajectory? Or is it only when we are concerned ourselves. And when I say we ourselves, is who is moving the needle in these discussions? It's the richer countries, right? And they didn't feel the brunt of climate change so much 22 years ago as they do today. And that's part of the explanation of this graph. And now it may be too late. I mean, I don't believe in too late, because too late means, okay, we give up, but we can't give up. I mean, we would give up on humanity then, but Earth would be happily ever after, right? This is the world without us, this book which we discussed the other day. So I think this graph really nicely illustrates this. We need to look everywhere, and we need to listen everywhere. Otherwise, we might miss it, and we might miss a good innovation, but we also might miss the alarms, because the people who ring the alarm may not be heard.
When do we start to listen? Sebastian Gros has just said, everyone. And just to make sure the graph is clear, what you're seeing on screen, that black line is a much gentler downhill slope. But we're now at the slope that's so steep, the action needs to be so abrupt that it starts to look like a cliff.
Or
and
Niagara
the question, yeah, like Niagara Falls. The question is when we start to listen. And if I had to pick one word that you've all been talking about so far, it's what it means to listen, and what it means not just to address a problem when it's already on top of us, right? The tidal wave's already on top of us. I've gone from Niagara Falls to a tidal wave very abruptly here, but instead because it can always get worse. It will get much worse now unless we start to listen. So I actually want to zero in on what we might do. Yes, jump in.
Yes, can I actually tell you? Because when you guys talked about listen, okay, but I am listening, but what if I'm not taking action? I think this is actually most crucial question that we must ask ourselves, not about just listening. So we can listen to a bunch of ideas, bunch of problems, but what if we don't take actions? What if we just say, okay, you know what? Thank you. Like, I listen to you. But I think listening must be followed by the action.
So that is such a beautiful lead in to what's on the next slide. And I'm happy about that, not just because it's on the next slide. Because if you look at the upper right-hand quadrant, there's looking critically, right? Listening informs critical thinking. And then there's recognizing opportunities. And I think what you said, Brumet, is so important, because in much of education, traditionally, critical thinking has been a close reading of a text or a paper analyzing a problem. And I love those. I write papers analyzing problems, and I like nothing better than to do a close reading of a text. And yet, opportunity recognition, which has so often been seen as a business skill, as a skill for folks who are opportunistic, who are seizing opportunities, and never the twain shall meet, right? Which is a very old-fashioned way of saying those two things have been separate often in how we've educated people. But if we're to hear what you're saying, Brumet, then I don't think we have the luxury to separate our critical thinkers from our opportunity seizers. It sounds like you're saying we need to stop leaving the field to opportunity seizers who haven't been listening, and then leaving the listening to folks who aren't doing anything with it, which can often feel as if it's the plight that we have put ourselves into with the way we've siloed people. And the other quadrants on this chart are of a piece with what we've just said, where if you think of Hector's first point, where he said, look, we not only need to be on that swarm, we need to be in those conversations, listening to each other, arguing with each other. That's the second thing. What I neglected to say when I put this chart up is that this is not just an illustration I did in 10 seconds with my beautiful skills to show Brumet's point with a graphic. This is actually what we're studying amongst the participants in the Global Changemaker Certificate program that we are all involved in evolving. And this is a program that we're, go for it.
Sorry,
Hector.
to interrupt, Ray. I want to add something about the listening part.
Thank you for interrupting.
No problem. I think that when we say, when are we going to start listening, I think there's another factor that needs to be included there, and then it's when I started realizing that the whole thing is not just about me. In other words, I'm going to start thinking that the problem is not just mine, or even seeing myself as a victim of a problem, and I start like taking a stand and say, well, listen, this goes beyond my interest, beyond my tribe, my family, my community. This is something that needs to involve more people. It's not just about me. It's about a community. It's about a city. It's about a country or a planet, right? So
it's interesting.
That is critical. Yeah, that's critical. When I look for opportunities, and in fact, that's something that I think we need to continue to help our students in our programs to realize, hey, listen, this goes beyond your own interests, and that is an opportunity recognition skill that I think I see most of the students that come to our classes, that comes to this program. They already kind of a little bit beyond their own, in a way, their own selfishness. Yeah. So just want to add that.
What you've done just now takes the idea of the imagined community and takes it to a community of action. Imagined community is Benedict Anderson's idea that prior to the time when we had newspapers, you really only thought of yourselves as related to the people you knew, typically, as a human being. And it was only the advent of a newspaper that would make me think, oh, I'm reading about people and I might have this identity as a Frenchman and think I had something in common, if I were French, with all of these people that I've never met. And I see myself in an imagined community. But what you've just done, Hector, is said maybe, and in a weird way, this gives me hope, maybe we have an opportunity to create imagined communities of action. Maybe that's what we're doing, where we develop a sense of community with people, not just in this fantasy of being of an imagined tribe with them, but in the kinds of shared action that you all talked about early in this call, where you're seeing that someone has a problem that you might have had, or you're working with them across your differences. Now, I'm going to take just 2 seconds because I want to build on these ideas that you've just said to just walk everybody through how, if this is an imagined community of action, we first had to think of disrupting broken systems, thinking critically and recognizing opportunities for change. We then had to figure out that collaboration across difference, those conversations across difference that were so beautifully described by our panel. And then finally, to Burmet's point just a moment ago, we needed to take action. And we didn't just need to act, we needed to act experimentally. We needed to learn the entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial skill of testing our ideas till they could become viable, lest we become people who either belly flop and never get back on the diving board. In my vernacular, belly flopping means you're on a diving board and you can imagine, right? You don't dive, you hit it with your stomach and it's very painful, right? Well, if you belly flop and get back on the board, you probably can get better at diving if you do it enough times. So testing ideas in action as we refine them. And I'm going to take just a second to just outline the way in which we've been doing this. So we have a group of universities and other partners around the world brought together by Open Society University Network. And we are just a few of the schools and regions involved, represented in this call. And what we're developing together, and this is truly evolving as we speak, is a program for folks around the world that want to do what we're describing here. This is not an advertisement for that program. This is something we've been building together. And those of you who after this panel are interested in collaborating on that, please don't hesitate to be in touch. We are humbled by the challenges involved. And the certificate includes sustainable development, understanding these waves of change and these challenges, such as Sebastian was talking about, social entrepreneurship, creating new experiments to replace things the way we do things today, not just businesses, but also social initiatives and nonprofits, and then leading change from within organizations, as in Shanila's example in the film we opened with. And the model that we've used, and we're about to end this message from our sponsors, as it were, is this global model. And when you hear us talking about all this interaction, where we work in what we call a fishbowl session, where we all challenge someone, we're on their side, helping them make their ideas real and feasible and able to be used by real users in the way Burmette was saying, and ways to pay for them and ways to get folks involved. We do all those skills, from market sizing to theory of change that Sebastian mentioned in the video. And then we have a set of structured modules that we put folks through, because we're doing this systematically, not just as a big idealistic idea. We're putting them through a structure where they then workshop locally. And each of the folks on this panel and our colleagues around the world lead local workshops, and then we come back together the following week on a global basis. And as I've mentioned, we use these things we call project builders that we've been evolving. And I even created a software company to power this because of this work. But they allow them to modularize the experience and then create these projects with participants from all around the world who want to address a problem like solar technology or cleaning up beaches or investing in young people or preventing child abuse, which are just the ones on screen. And what I'm just going to note is that we measure what this builds. We measure the way in which young people walk away from what Hector so beautifully described as awareness of powers, problems, and perspective, learning about the chance that they could spend their lives or their time doing this, and building the confidence and the connections and the skills to do so. And that framework I showed at the beginning has measurably now across 14 countries shown on the right hand that folks either start out strong or make leaps into strength in those key areas we talked about. So I'm actually going to put the slides away at this point, because the fun part is, as we on this panel now deepen the discussion about both the excitement of figuring out how to do this and the challenges we're facing. And I want to emphasize that folks who are listening are welcome to offer questions, which I understand we are going to see in the chat, if I understand correctly. So let's pick up right away with what you had been saying about not just listening, but listening in action. What spells the difference in your experience between just wanting to solve a problem and actually going through the experience, not necessarily of succeeding in solving it, but of learning to become an active listener and creator of solutions for real people? What makes that difference, and how can we make that available more broadly than we have so far?
Should I chime in?
Please.
I think it's something which we debate among us instructors, right? But it's the way we give feedback, that maybe at the beginning of the semester, students get away with, I believe, I think, they have this problem, and I heard, and so forth. But very quickly we change gears and say, no. Do you know or you don't know? And please stop scratching on the surface. Do you know something? How many people did you test this with? So that we very quickly get very serious. And I think in part, this course lives also from that we have a lot of instructors which are hybrid beings, meaning social entrepreneurs themselves and lecturers, because they won't let them get away with, yeah, this is a very, very severe problem and I would like to solve this. And then I describe this problem and dwell in this problem, and I'll solve it by doing magic. Nobody in our course, I think, gets away with it, and they realize that fairly quickly. And I think the course lives from, yes.
Can you meditate, don't lose your next thought, on what the experience is like because we all watch it. We watch the goldfish in the bowl, right? Which is a person solving a problem. And they're getting all this from peers and instructors. They're getting all this, yeah, this is great, but it's not magic. And what are you going to do? Now, is that a demoralizing experience? What do they go through as they experience that? And how does that affect them? Do you mind just breaking that open for us before you continue?
I think, again, the course lives there from versatility, because I'm quite harsh, I have to say, and I sometimes feel bad for the teams. But then, we have other colleagues who explain to them that I'm actually mean it good. And I mean it well. So that's what happened last week, right? I almost felt bad, like, oh my God, I crushed them, poor people. But then again, we need to realize, right, that we don't have time for just kudos and oh, awesome. And that will not move the needle. That will not make their project fundamentally better. So it's a fine line. And I think we as instructor team also live off this. If I taught this course alone, probably, I would have a lot of students dropping off because they might get demoralized. But since we are a group and we have a certain diversity and versatility there, this really benefits because they get it from different perspectives. And if 2 or 3 people say, hey, look, maybe this is not such a good idea after all. Maybe you have to dig a lot deeper. If you hear this 3 times in the same fishbowl, I think you start believing it. And I think so for me, one of the critical things from listening and then also start acting, but also start acting for real, not in talking.
Now, there's got to be a level.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah, no, I think the feedback in our fishbowls, and the fishbowls at the end of the day in our classes is the majority of the time, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's very, very essential that the folks get a reality check and really work hard to make this a solution which actually works, not on slides, but in reality.
Yeah.
I just want to ask everyone, jump in.
Well, I just want to say something. I have been a social entrepreneur myself in the past, and I failed miserably. And one of the reasons, I'm finding with this course, I wish I had a Sebastian Krog 10, 15 years ago telling me the things that you tell our students, and I realized that I made such a, I say silly mistakes, that if I had a little bit of knowledge, just a fraction of the knowledge I'm getting in this class, my trajectory would have been different. I'm not saying it's bad right now because I'm loving what I'm doing, but I've taken the long route, right? Things like choosing the right problems and falling in love with the problem, not with the solutions. I wish I had known that before. Or distinguishing between customers and users. It's a simple concept, but I didn't know then the difference. And now that I know, it really makes a lot of sense. For instance, being able to pivot, to change, to understand that that's not the right way, instead of being stubborn and fixating with it. I'm going to prove to the world that I know how to do this. Finding the right talent, finding the right people to work with. So there's a few concepts that I've gotten from this course and my students are getting from this course that would really make a difference in the trajectory of their social entrepreneur projects. So yeah, I wish I had you, Sebastian, a few years ago.
You heard it here, bro. You're admitting that we sometimes have to tell the students that you mean it well, but I actually relate to what you're saying strongly, Hector, when I think back on my first business, which failed very painfully for me. And I've spoken about this publicly, but had I had some of this, Burmet, I wanted to get your take on what we're talking about right now. That let me tee it up this way. The research shows that when you watch a how-to video online, you just watch someone show you how to, juggle or cook some dish. Most of us have a false understanding that we've learned it by watching it. We rate ourselves as having learned, and we really have not learned very much about how to do it. But they say that if it's juggling, if I so much as have to hold a juggling pin while watching the video, just hold the juggling pin, right? These pins that one juggle, right? Then my false estimation of what I've learned reduces, right? So in some degree, there's a lot of juggling pins that we're talking about here. I'm curious, Burmet, your take on this reality check process, which is, it's very unusual, right? We're actually challenging students to do these idealistic things and then sort of not just ourselves criticizing them, but getting their peers to criticize them. And by criticizing them, as we all have to explain when Sebastian's doing it, help them so that others might have wished they had had that 15 years ago. So what's your take, Burmet?
I totally agree with Sebastian and Hector that students are sure, 100% sure that they're in the right direction until they are actually given feedback. But what Sebastian told, we must actually provide the feedback with the tips, right? On how and where to go, what to do, what we need to actually ask. So this is not just a feedback. I love actually when Sebastian asks very challenging questions, which really pushes students to think more or just walk one step closer to the mountains, right? What we're actually trying to solve. And I also understood one thing that students and in my classes, sometimes they get scared. They get scared to seeing that mountain. They're like, oh my God, are we walking to that mountain? Like, how can I actually walk? Like, I think I am alone on that pathway. But then we all come together and we see that they are not the only one struggling. They're not the only one who's actually been thinking about the solution or been thinking about that problem to address. Then they feel like, oh, okay, I'm not walking alone. I have actually other footsteps that are actually walking alongside, not behind me, not in front of me. We are all walking alongside. We are making, is what you actually mentioned earlier about Alejandro, is like small steps, right? Small steps. We are making small steps towards that power of what I mentioned about mountains. Yes. And I believe that we are, as an instructors, also during the cohorts and students hearing different feedback from different professors, that maybe I was also harsh during the class, local cohort, right? Saying, hey, like, I don't think I don't think you are listening to your customers or your users correctly. So do you want to actually ask more questions or try to ask open-ended questions or look into or observe the situation? If you cannot really hear the answer, then observe. So maybe you will spend one day observing what's happening there, because observation actually speaks totally different what people actually talk. And yes, so this is, I also wanted to talk about a little bit, that's when you actually share the circle, like openness, students being open. And this is challenge to every one of us, being open to listen, being open to accept. So, and I always actually train and teach my students, hey, okay, let's do this. Like, let's like all of us take a strain. So we will just shake it off, leave all this good feedback and accept all those good feedback and just throw away all this negative or what you thought maybe it's not actually good for you. I mean, for your, maybe your enterprise, what you're thinking, or maybe for your idea. Yes, this is what I think. Hector, Sebastian, Alejandro.
Wow. Walk one step closer to the mountain. You make me want to read, and I won't do this right now, a poem that one of our students sent, who actually launched her business and has run it now for years, at the end of this experience. And it's a business to change how we interact with clothing and help disadvantaged populations. So if we have time at the end, you made me think, strange as it might sound, of reading the poem she sent on the last day of class. Before we do, I'd love to hear thoughts from both you guys. And I'm going to talk as little as I can in these last 10 minutes here on what Burmet has talked about, that step, that path toward the mountain that we're describing.
I want to say something about that. I love the metaphor, but one thing that to me has been probably one of the most surprisingly valuable aspects of this course is being able, in my case, being able to learn from people like Burnett or Sebastian or you, Alejandro, from totally different parts of the world, right? You speak different languages, you eat differently. The whole world looks
Culture.
different. And being able to talk, discuss, learn, find similarities, but also find differences. The value is amazing, but also my students being able to create teams with folks from a completely different part of the world that otherwise wouldn't be able to, people being able to think problems, one person from Jerusalem, the other person from Kyrgyzstan, the other person from Lithuania. Just imagining that a few months ago for me would have been impossible. Being able, in my case, for instance, and in the case of my students, even communicating in English, it's difficult. But just the fact that they can practice, communicate, make an extra effort to communicate their ideas in English, it's an incredibly valuable experience. They don't have it here. So there's an amazing wealth of opportunity, learning opportunities that I think we're providing to our students that not necessarily, I wouldn't have those, or them wouldn't have those opportunities if it weren't because for this program. So I just want to add that.
Alejandro, let me talk a little bit about our own mountain we want to still climb ourselves, right? Because as good things are, there is obviously also lots of still to improve, and in terms of outcomes and outputs that we have. And to start with is, in terms of a measure of how much international collaboration we have, I think we're still not where we want to be in terms of international teams. There is still, and to put it in Burnett's words, if I'm stepping towards a mountain, I better play it safe with my team, right? So I take my friends from my own cohort. So let's say, you only want to change so and so many parameters. So a lot of play it safe, and that I think is in part a lost opportunity. Play it safe in terms of ideas. I rather take something, which is in my environment, which is a problem, which is important, which is critical. But we see, for instance, very few, and that's where my heart lies, big climate tech plays. We see very little, and I get it. Why? Because it's scary. I already have this mountain, and I make the mountain triple, and also there has to be a grade at the end of the semester, right? So I better play it safe. So I think there we still have some work to do to get students away from play it safe and be real, like what literally entrepreneur means.
Let's just challenge ourselves. Go.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one thing what we are right now doing, I believe in the right direction is we are taking actions by providing a platform for students where they can gather together and like global cohorts, social entrepreneurship with also. This is actually a great opportunity. And this is, I believe, yes, this is what we need to think and work in the future, Sebastian. Great, yes.
I was on a podcast yesterday, and the interviewer asked me about this question. So if it's often the case in programs for less advantaged entrepreneurs that the businesses take less risk. This is what someone I was speaking to who runs a program, I won't say which one, that has tens of thousands of entrepreneurs in it says. And we got asking ourselves, what gives me that sense that I can take the bigger leap at a time when, if you think of the graph that we showed earlier, we've got to be taking big leaps. We have to take a lot of them, right? And that's more important than everything being a blowout play, but we have to take many of them. So the question, and we'll leave it because we're about to run out of time as a question, is what gives us what I like to call the luxury of risk. And I will put, this is a student, former student, now social entrepreneur, called Masha Zabara. And she said, that when she was filling out the responses on the last day of class, we were doing a survey, she was listening to a song called Black Sands. And she wrote this, and I hope she's okay that I'm sharing it. She said, "We are fragile and stronger than ever, pushing each other to pull the lever, dragging humanity out of the black sands, unsure of when this madness ends, stacking up builders onto the project of rebellion." Now, I hadn't planned on sharing that, but when you talked about fellows with whom to climb that mountain and how we can challenge ourselves and support each other to take bigger leaps, I couldn't help but look it up.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Very beautiful.
Alejandro, do we want to invite others to join the new certificate, the Social Enterprise and Leading Change Certificate, also non-OSUN members?
Yes,
I'm doing the call to action here.
Thank you.
Yes,
if you're
let's
interested
do
in
it.
taking part of this experience, you can find, if you just Google the OSUN, O-S-U-N, certificate programs, you'll find the certificate in social entrepreneurship that we've been describing. And I can put that site up so that anyone can get involved. And by the way, as a partner organization, as a facilitator, Hector, how many days did you call me before you got involved? It was what, like 10 minutes maybe? It was amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, I learned about this, and I was sure I wanted to do this. So I started moving everything, it wasn't easy, but I had to look for different people within the school, the university, and I managed to find also an amazing group of students that were willing to take this risk with me, and it's been it's been a great experience for them as well. But it was also taking the risk. I mean, on itself, it was an entrepreneurship exercise, right? I had to go and
oh yeah,
talk to
you were
people.
definitely asking forgiveness, not permission, man.
I know it was groundbreaking because nobody has done that before at the university where I work.
In higher ed too, right?
We need to
of.
find ways and paths, and okay, so how do we do this? Well, let's find out. And here we are. So I encourage people to just try, give it a shot, and figure it out, because it'll work at the end, and it'll be an amazing, incredible experience. Yeah. Thank you, Alejandro.
And no, thank you, Hector. I am putting on screen, since Sebastian had the presence of mind to suggest it, you can see this is the URL here. It's https://GPS, that's George Peter Simon.bar.edu/social-enterprise. And you can learn more about the certificate program. We are having courses run this spring in leading change in organizations. I know, Sebastian, you're participating. I think, Hector, you are too. But Ahmed, I wasn't sure if you were in that one.
Yes.
So everyone is in both courses. That's amazing. And that is, the global lead for that is my august colleague, Aurora Winslade, who is co-creating methodology with the team of instructors, much as we have for social entrepreneurship. And we'll also be offering this spring a global course in sustainability and understanding these big trends and being able to take advantage of them. So there's a foundation led by my good friend, the brilliant Hunter Lovins, again with faculty around the world. So please don't hesitate to do that. And Sebastian, thanks. I was getting so into finding Masha's poem that I didn't think to put this up. I do want to say what an extraordinary pleasure it is for me, privilege and a pleasure, to have this discussion. We're all now gonna probably find some place in the virtual world and talk all night over some kind of good Turkish coffee or something like that. But seriously speaking, what a pleasure to discuss this with you guys. I walked away from this conversation with those insights that stick in one's head about that swarm that climbed toward the mountain together, that power, problems and perspective and everything that you described. So thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. And we hope that you'll be in touch with us. If you have any questions, I don't know if you guys want to give your contact information. I'm easy to reach. My email address is acrawford at bard.edu. Again, that's A as an apple, Crawford, CRAWFORD, at like Joan Crawford, the actress, at bard, BARD.edu. And so if you guys have more questions about these programs, I don't have all the answers, but we're happy to tell you more or have a discussion with you.
Thanks, Alejandro.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hector.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Pleasure.
having
As
us,
usual.
Paco.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much,
Hope our
everyone.
paths cross
Enjoy the rest of the
sometime in
summit.
future.